Pharmaceutical Development Association y'all should all think about joining. So to begin the discussion, I'm going to ask the panelists to give a brief description of their background and their career path to date. Some of you submitted questions online. Thanks very much. We'll start with those, and then we'll open up to questions from the audience. So, sorry. Bill, since you're closest to me?
Sure. Okay, so I have a PhD, and a PhD in molecular neurobiology, and I did a postdoc at Duke, and after that, well, I decided I wanted to work as a medical writer, so I went to work for a small biotech company called Synergy, mostly writing grants and then some regulatory documents when, as the opportunities came up. And then I guess almost 2 years ago, I made the transition to Quintiles, where I work as a medical writer.
My name's Kristi. I did my PhD at NIH, actually, in a joint program with George Washington University. And then I came to Duke and did a postdoc in the pharmacology department. About 2 years into my 3.5-year postdoc, I switched from being on the academic track to wanting to do something that was not academia. I didn't have quite the focus of knowing I wanted to be a medical writer. So I started applying for jobs, and your postdoc experience provides a lot of support for a medical writing type job, experience-wise. So I looked at jobs in that field, and I actually settled on, I wouldn't say my job is actually as a medical writer. I do a lot of writing. It's more along the lines of regulatory writing now, and I can talk more about that as it pertains to the topics.
I'm Amy Wollish. I received my PhD at UNC in microbiology and immunology. But when I was ready to graduate and look for jobs and postdocs, I kind of used a postdoc as a jumping board towards what I wanted to do next. It gave me an opportunity to learn both in the postdoc and also some time to explore other options. So I did my postdoc here at DCRI, Clinical Research Institute, with an MD who was doing really translational research. And during that time, I also worked as a contract editor and did a few things at American Journal Experts, I'm sure some of you might be aware of. And I really reached out to professional organizations in the area, such as NCRAFT and American Medical Writers Association. And now I'm currently an associate medical writer at
And I'm Mike Hast, and I actually got my PhD here and also did a short postdoc here before moving to my current position. Kind of like Kristi, I figured out pretty soon into my postdoc that the academic track wasn't for me, or really even bench science for that matter. So sort of like her, I was not super focused as far as what I thought I wanted to do after that, and it really kind of came to the realization after going on a couple of different interviews what kinds of jobs seemed like they'd be fun. And medical writing seemed like fun, at least when I interviewed at those places, and so I kind of took a chance and took one of those jobs. And I've been at MedThink for a little over a year, and we do all sorts of different kinds of medical writing. It's I can talk a little bit about the different kinds of projects that we have, but it's been extremely fun. It's something that you end up using all of your scientific analytical skills. You're absolutely scientifically engaged the whole time, but in a much friendlier environment than the lab.
And maybe we can go from there. So talk about what a typical day is like and what your responsibilities are.
Sure. So as far as the different kinds of projects that we have kind of have two types. One is major, like just traditional publications work. So pharmaceutical companies will hire us to write their manuscripts for them, submit them for publication, submit abstracts and posters and oral presentations to conferences. So it's all the stuff that you guys, we've all done lots and lots and lots of. So that's very much in our wheelhouse. But the other half of the kinds of work that we do, it's more strategic. So pharmaceutical companies will hire us to come up with a strategic publication plan for them and to come up with something called a scientific platform. And the publication plan is something like, you look at your next 5 years and you say, these are the products that I have, here are where our competitors are in their clinical development, and how do we strategize the kinds of publications and the kind of conference presence that we need to have to basically be the best in our field. And that's actually extremely fun, but absolutely nothing like what we've done as postdocs. I mean, you need the scientific skills, but the strategy work is really entertaining, I think. And so as far as a typical day, it really varies based on what kind of project you have. I mean, some days you're actually just sitting at the computer writing a manuscript. Sometimes you might actually be flying out to visit a client in a different place and having a workshop or a meeting. I like the fact that every day might be a little bit different.
So the majority of what I do probably falls into regulatory writing as well. And that means that on a daily basis, I am working on one of a few different projects. So I'm usually balancing 3 or 4 projects at once, which usually entail what's called a clinical study report. So writing up the results of a year or so, or even up to maybe 5 years of a clinical trial that's now completed. So it's at the end of the clinical trial, and you're writing up the document that gets submitted to regulatory agencies such as the FDA. This is about, say, a 150 to 200 page document that follows the standard structure that the regulatory agencies are expecting. And it takes a long time kind of to learn the process, but you learn a lot along the way. And what I like about the work that we do is that it's varied. So one day you might be working on a drug for liver disease. The next day you might be working on something in cardiology. So it's very varied. You're always learning and kind of on the cutting edge, I guess, of drugs that are coming out, and just learning about how the drug development process works. So I work on CSRs, protocols for these studies, investigator brochures, documents of that nature. And my day, I have a couple of meetings sort of throughout the week, here and there, with clients on the phone for the most part, and most of my time is spent simply just writing these documents, working on timelines, managing the publishing team, and sort of operating within my team to get the information needed to put into these documents.
So I also do more of the regulatory writing, and what we focus on as research scientists at Camargo, we're a project lead on multiple different projects at any given time, and the projects we tend to lead are feasibility reports where a client would come to the company and say, I have this drug, what's the most aggressive regulatory pathway, what's the most aggressive clinical strategy, how much is it going to cost, how much time is it going to take, is it a good idea, bad idea? Or they might come and say, I've got 6 drugs, which one should I develop first, et cetera, et cetera. So those are feasibilities. Then we have submissions to the FDA, either in terms of meetings for different stages along the drug development process, or submissions of applications for a drug to get approved. So we'll be the project lead on those. And a typical day will consist of some client interaction, a lot of writing, some internal interaction to address questions regarding non-clinical programs or clinical programs or regulatory strategy. And then for projects where we're submitting meeting packages to the FDA, we'll also go to DC and meet with the FDA to discuss, sort of negotiate the clinical path. And that's because Camargo focuses on a specific regulatory pathway called 505(b)(2), which is not the typical drug development pathway that sponsors tend to go through, which is large and long. It's an abbreviated pathway that just came out 11 years ago, where you can take information from other approved drugs or the public literature, things like that, and you can reference that material to cut out steps in the drug development process. So it's really interesting on a project-by-project basis to sort of strategize your way into doing the least number of clinical programs and getting your client to develop or an approved drug with the least amount of money or the shortest amount of time. So shortening a program from 20 years and $100 million to 2.5 years and $8 million. It's very exciting.
Yeah, so I'm also all regulatory writing, and like Amy, most of what I do are clinical study reports, protocols, and investigator brochures. Occasionally we get different types of documents like a clinical development plan, which is the strategy for all the clinical trials and all the research that needs to be done for a new drug. Or we'll do a project where we're just writing patient narratives. Those are sort of short summaries of every time a patient has an adverse reaction in a trial, you have to write a short summary of what happened. But most of it is clinical study reports. And we do have a lot of meetings. In medical writing, you're usually running the meetings, so you have a sort of a kickoff meeting at the beginning of a project where you introduce yourself to the sponsor and the team and make some decisions about what's going to happen during the project and the timelines. After the data comes in, then you have a key messages meeting where you go through all the data, and that can be about a 4-hour meeting that you're running where you're talking about what you want to summarize for each piece of data for the trial. And then there's another meeting after the sponsors review the document where, so usually the sponsor is remote, so the meetings are all teleconferences, and you're showing your screen so they can all see it, and you'll put your document up on the screen and go through each comment and argue about it, and then try to get the whole team to come to an agreement on how to describe something in the report. And I would say that medical writing is really, it's only about 40% actual sitting and writing, and the rest of it is project management and trying to get these doctors and statisticians to give you the pieces that you need to write your report, and trying to get them to review on time and building timelines, and then if someone doesn't review on time, trying to adjust the timeline so that you can still meet your deadline.
Explanation. So how did y'all get your job? A couple of years ago, you were postdocs. How did you make the leap?
Yep. So I first applied for a grant writer position at Energy, and I got that, I think, because of my experience writing grants. But then working there for a while, I built up a resume where I could show that I had experience writing, and that really helped get the position at Quintiles. I networked a lot, and I'm not sure if I got the position at Quintiles through networking or through applying for an ad. A couple of my networks uploaded my resume, but there weren't any openings at the time. Later on, when an opening showed up, I applied and was called in for an interview. But I'm not sure whether the networking helped for that or not. Although I would definitely recommend networking anyway, because certainly it helps you get past HR often, and it also just helps you be able to speak intelligently in an interview, know what you're getting into and what the job is like.
I definitely got my job through networking, 100%. I went to the jobs networking events at the NC Biotech Center, and they have hiring managers and individuals from companies come to the events, and those people get bombarded with resumes and cards and people going and crowding around them at the end to talk about getting a job. And I met our VP of Drug Development, Gary Barnett, at one of those events and submitted my resume. He forwarded it on to HR, and then I got a call a couple days later. So 100% networking for me.
You had to wait till the bitter end of the event, too, didn't you?
Well, I waited till the bitter end of the event on purpose because there were like 30 people around him for the entire hour-long thing. So I waited until the last like 10 minutes, and then I went up when there were only 5 or 6 people around him, and I think I was the second to last person to actually talk to him. But he was kind of worn out at that point. He's very gregarious, so it was okay, but I felt bad for him. He was bombarded at that event.
So I got my job through a combination of networking and the gym. So a friend that I had actually boxed with a few years back, I was friendly with at the gym. I ran into her at an AMWOC conference a couple years later when I was And we caught up again, got her contact information. A few months later, she emailed me that a job had opened that I would meet the requirements for, and I had actually already applied to that job when she emailed me, but I think that really helped me to get my resume through and get an interview. It all worked out.
There was not really a networking component to the job that I got. I just applied via their website and got a call. Networking is not really consistent with my personality, so I was avoiding it for as long as possible. But I have heard many, many stories like these other three guys that it's extremely valuable, so don't avoid it. But yeah, it was very straightforward. They had an ad on the website, and it was less submitting your CV and more like answering a whole bunch of questions about your career goals and why medical writing interests you. It was a very interesting application process. But they gave me a call and I had a phone interview, and then they brought me in for an in-person interview.
So what can postdocs and grad students do to position themselves strategically? So NC Biotech Jobs Network has been mentioned. Does NCRAF have meetings? Does AMWA have meetings? You mentioned one like there's is there training you can get? So 2 of you are RSEs. Talk a little bit about that. Position filling.
Sure. Yeah. I would say that anything you can do to distinguish yourself will help. Really, industry looks a lot more at your experience rather than your credentials. So they're not necessarily looking for you to have taken the RIC, the Regulatory Affairs certification. But if you have that, I think it will distinguish you from other people that don't have it. And I was told it was a positive. But working for American Journal Experts helped. I did that also. And really what they're looking for is to show your experience writing. So on your resume, you want to highlight what you did with your dissertation, your papers you've written, the grants you've written, and any kind of experience like that. And then it also helps to have something extra to distinguish yourself from other people coming out of academia.
Well, at Camargo, we have an internship program that started. Our first interns came in January of this year, and now we're on our second class of interns. It's a 6-month program, and that program is open to postdocs at Duke and now UNC. And we started it in conjunction with Molly's help. And our last round of interns, we actually hired 2 out of the 4 people that interned, and we may be, depending on what positions we have open, we may be hiring people again this year. So those types of programs, internships, I think there's also an internship at DTMI for regulatory writing. I want to say that's, do you know how long that is? It's not that long.
It's only like
8
6 to 8 weeks
yeah.
or so.
But 2 out of the 5 research scientists that I work with at Camargo did that program. And I believe one of our, or maybe 2 of our interns also did the program. So I think there's a bit of a waiting list. Did you do that program?
Yeah, I did it.
But it seems to be good experience. So things like that.
Yeah, I mean, as the other panelists have mentioned, I think the biggest challenge in medical writing is actually getting your foot in the door, because without experience, it's really difficult. So what you have to do is really put yourself on the top of that pool of people that have PhDs and postdoc academic experience. And in order to put yourself on the top, you need to just reach out and network and find out what are the opportunities out there. Because, as we mentioned, there are definitely opportunities out there that take some sort of time and energy commitment. So it's not something that can be done in a couple weeks. It's something that you need to set out a plan for, say, 6 months to a year, where you're going to really dedicate 2 or 3 days, nights or mornings a week towards your development that can get you into medical writing. And these are things such as that DTMI internship. I think it's usually 1 morning a week for, say, 4 hours. So it's not a huge commitment to take out of your week for about 6 to 8 weeks. And that's a really great experience. look into American Journal experts, and just attend these networking events where people have opportunities that they're willing to share with you about things that are possible around here and get you experience in regulatory affairs or medical writing.
I have to agree, like the more things that you can do to differentiate yourself from everybody else who's applying who has a PhD from a good place, you know, you actually need to put something on there. So as far as my background was concerned, when I interviewed at MedThink, they were pleased that I had grant writing experience because there is an element of strategy to grant writing. So if you are heavily involved with that, with your advisor, that's something to actually make sure you get across, because it's very important to show that you have medical writing experience or good writing experience. You need to have papers on your CV, solid ones, multiple ones, because that's evidence that you write and things that you produce are being accepted out there. And you know, much of the medical writing field is very clinical. So you know, these guys are assembling clinical study reports. At my job, I actually get the clinical study reports from the pharmaceutical companies and then write manuscripts from them. And that was not actually my training at all. Like, I'm not a crystallographer by training, so it was a leap to get to the clinical side of things from a very molecular science. So what I did during my postdoc time at Duke was I participated in a Scholars in Infectious Disease program. I don't know, I think they have several scholars programs now. I think you participated in one too.
Cardiology, neuro.
And it gives you some clinical exposure where you might not get it otherwise. So you'll go on rounds with physicians, you'll go to journal clubs, you'll discuss issues with physicians here at Duke. And just putting that on my resume, I got a ton of questions about it and the experience that gave me. And it's a pretty minimal time commitment as a postdoc, but it really, I think, was something that people zeroed in on my resume.
And that's headed up by Patsy, correct?
Yes, yeah.
SE.
Who's a very gregarious person, would love to talk to you about the program.
Yeah, that's a great program. It's just really interesting in general. I mean, when I started doing it, it was more just because I was like, I don't know what I want to do. And it's something other than academia, so it was just experience in that way. But yeah, that's a good program. But I want to point out that all four of us got jobs, you know, in medical writing from being a postdoc. So even though it is difficult to get your foot in the door, it is definitely possible. And if you can craft your resume, your cover letter in a way that really reflects your skills, which you already have the skills just from getting your PhD and doing your postdoc, you have those skills. You just need to figure out the best way to highlight it.
Now, do you feel that doing a postdoc is necessary for this kind of job? Or?
Yeah, no, I don't think it's necessary. I don't think it would hurt. But I guess if you do what's most important is that you show that you really want to do medical writing, and that's your goal. I think during an interview, if it comes across as though you're not really sure what you want to do, that can be a negative. So doing a very long postdoc could be a problem. A postdoc is certainly not required.
And to get hired at Camargo, you have to have done a postdoc, not because you learned something in your postdoc that you don't learn in your PhD. That's just like a hiring practice. So there, like Bill was saying, there isn't anything you learned in your postdoc that you didn't already learn in your PhD. It's just more experience, and some companies prefer that, and others don't seem to care. So, but you definitely don't need it.
And can you talk a little bit about the application and interview process? Did they show you how one time think you right, or how did it?
Camargo has a very weird application process. Mike was saying that he had to answer a lot of questions at MedThink. When you apply on Camargo, you have to take this 90-minute online test called the Achiever. And it is bizarre. You feel like you're in a parallel universe. Why am I taking this? What is this thing? Because it's a mixture of sort of an IQ test and a skills test and a personality test and the SATs. I mean, it's it's got numerous different sections. I'm blanking on it 2 years later, but there are a bunch of different sections. They're all timed, and you have to take this test, and you think it's totally crazy and that you failed because it's just very bizarre. There's a whole mechanical section, and I was like, what does this have to do with writing? I'm not going to be, car mechanic. But they place a very heavy emphasis on this test at the higher levels because it is both useful in the interview process from the interviewers. It pulls out areas to focus on that maybe your strengths or weaknesses. And it also has had, according to our CEO, like high predictive ability about who is going to be good and succeed in the role and who doesn't. So I don't know, it's very weird. I never saw it in any of the other places, so don't be scared. But if you apply for something at Camargo, it's very bizarre. But we had to do a writing test. I'm assuming, did you guys all have to do a writing test?
No, not at Quintiles, they don't do writing tests.
Oh.
But one of the people I spoke with decided they would give me a test anyway. So.
Okay. Well, most of the writing jobs I applied for, we had a writing test. And then the interview process itself, I never had any crazy, scary interview stories. They hear about these weird, like making you log into a Facebook page and telling how many, but I always had really nice interview. I interviewed at MedThink where Mike works, and I thought everyone was really great.
Yeah, the interviews that I had were both at MedThink and in some other places were extremely friendly and low pressure. At MedThink, one of the things that we want to make sure is that, a lot of the medical writers are client-facing, so we actually will be engaging with clients on the phone or in person, conducting workshops. So part of the interview process is to kind of like gauge your personality. So you'll get questions that aren't necessarily about science at all. It's just seeing how you interact with people. That's extremely important, and it's also important that you show that you're motivated and focused on that kind of job. If you come in and you're just like, yeah, I'm here because I need a job that's not a postdoc because I'm losing funding or something like that, that is not going to fly. And you have to fake it really well because they can see through it. So you have to be motivated and focused on that.
Yeah. And I think there's always a period at the end where they ask if you have any questions, and the interviewers pay a lot of attention to what questions you ask. So
have questions.
Yeah, and have questions that show that you're very committed to medical writing and that you know something about what medical writing is and that you've been prepared.
Or something about the company.
Yeah.
Right.
Look at their website, formulate a question, even if you think you understand something, just ask them, and it shows that you're invested a little bit.
Right. But also, you're interviewing them too. You're looking for a place where you want to work and you're going to fit. So asking about the company culture and things like that should be high on your priority list, because you may feel like, oh, I just need a job, I'll take any job, but you really should look at it as a two-way street, both because it is a two-way street and because it will make you a little less terrified during the process because you feel a measure of control in that situation.
And usually the process is first you do a phone interview. At Quintiles, first you do a phone interview. At Quintiles, you do it with the person that's going to hire you. Sometimes it's with HR, and then they'll call you in for a face-to-face interview with several people later. Face-to-face with some people, and other people are remote and maybe even in another country. You'll be speaking to them on the phone during the interview.
Ours was similar to that too, except at the end we had to give a 30-minute presentation on something that interests you in clinical research, I think it was. So that was a bit daunting.
You really committed to booking a 30-minute presentation.
So did anyone get asked why they were choosing this work over a traditional academic path? And what did you say?
Yeah, that's pretty much the first question.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've gone through the whole PhD, postdoc thing, it's very natural to ask, well, why do you want to do this now? And it's okay to say, I just don't like lab work, and you're phrasing it, you know, in a professional way. But you know, everybody who's there in medical within the company who has PhDs made that similar career transition, so they're on board with that. You just have to, you know, make it seem like something that I've just decided this isn't the path for me. You know, what are the things about medical writing that you think would be fun and professionally satisfying?
Yeah, I think that question is a good time to bring up, you know, your experience in X volunteer opportunity or, you know, internship led me to want to pursue medical writing because I did this and I was really interested in it. I wanted to do more of this type of work, or whatever you've done that has made you passionate about thinking about doing it as a career.
And how intellectually satisfying do you find this work as compared to academic research?
I wouldn't say as compared to. You're being satisfied in the same scientific way. You're just not doing the experiments anymore. You're still analyzing data and presenting data. It's, you know, basically everything after you complete your experiment, you're doing the same stuff. That's all the, you know, same skill set.
I was just going to say, I would say in some ways I would even find it more satisfying because you have multiple different projects, and at least at Camargo, they're all in different therapeutic areas. So when I'm, you know, working on a copper IUD product and I get sick of reading about uterine-related things, then I move on to my ephedrine product and I start reading more about cardiac and hypertension, things like that. So the ability to go from one therapeutic area to another, even within the day, I find to be more interesting on some levels than, you know, the repeating a Western blot over and over and over and reading the, you know, the same 3 famous guys' papers every 5 minutes. That's just me, though.
I would say definitely every day there's something intellectually stimulating or satisfying. There's also days when you're just moving around commas or parts of the day and punctuation and spelling, but that's probably the same as doing Western blot over and over again. I think that it's intellectually challenging in a different way. You're not going to be designing any experiments. You're not really planning experiments, at least in working for a CRO doing regulatory writing. But you are, so if you're working on a protocol, you have to really figure out the protocol and understand that when one person tells you that we want to change this, then you're going to have to figure out, well, how's that going to change the entire protocol? And that can be challenging. And then there's also these oddball projects that you get on where the sponsor doesn't really know what they want, the team doesn't really know, and then that can be a lot of fun to try to figure out how to present this and what you're supposed to do for this kind of document.
Mm-hmm. Or when a client comes to you and has this novel pill delivery form that, you know, unfolds in the stomach over X number of hours, and they're just like, what kind of drug should I put on here that would be good and that would make it better than the way the drug is delivered now? And that's one of those things where you're just like, you know, you just dig into the literature and you start investigating things, and it's like a puzzle. It's sometimes very exciting, other times very dull. And clients are a whole different ballgame.
So can you work at home from this job? You have to show up at the office every morning at 8 a.m. and stay till 5, or can you leave and go home and see your kids, your pets?
We have writers that work full-time at home. We have writers that work 2 days in the office, 3 days at home, and then we have some that are full-time. I'm 50-50, and I don't think no one has a set schedule. They're not, as long as you're as long as you're getting the projects done, they don't really care what hours you work. Some people like to work very late. Some people like to work early.
Yeah, it's definitely a thing you can do at home. My company doesn't really like people to work from home. It's a very small company and there's a lot of team interaction. But, you know, when you have the snowpocalypse and daycare is closed, you know, they'll let you work from home for, you know, brief periods of time. But I imagine companies are just different. We don't have anyone who's allowed to work 50-50. That sounds kind of fun. 50% of the week in your pajamas.
For what we do, the people that we're interacting with are mostly not in RTP. They're in other the team is in other countries or other cities, and either the sponsor maybe, and sometimes you're even, so most of what you do is on IM and email and phone, so it doesn't really matter if you're in the office or not. And also sometimes you're working with a sponsor that's in China or Japan, so then you can have weird hours where you need to have meetings late at night or early in the morning to accommodate their time zone.
We have a similar situation where many of our employees are remote or home-based. Some people come into the office if that's their preference. I've been at the company a year now, just over a year, and I'm transitioning. I'll be full-time at home starting in October. So it's pretty exciting. And we really support home-based writers. We actually had a little symposium a couple weeks ago where we had a panel of writers give some tips and tricks for how to manage working at home, and just it's a different sort of mentality, and there are tricks that go along with it, because I think one of my biggest negatives, I guess, about medical writing is the sedentary nature of the job. And so for me, when I'm at home, I'm a little bit more active. It ends up that my day is longer, but I might be like running down the stairs a couple times to go get something, and it just makes my day longer. But staying active throughout the day is helpful for me. Because if I do sit for 8 hours straight, my energy goes really low. So it's just something that I know I've learned how to make work for me. I know.
I think every company is going to be different. Our company is also on the smallish side, and the culture is you really should be there to have a nice collegial atmosphere. They like you to be there every day. So nobody works from home unless, again, it's the snowpocalypse. Then you have your computer, you can log in via the VPN, do whatever you need to do. But we're generally there in the office every day. And our hours are pretty reasonable. It's 8:30 to 5:30, unless there's a client in a weird place that you have, a call that's late at night or super early in the morning. You can't control that. But personally for me, that actually works really well. I like the structure of having to go to the office. I'm very poorly accountable to do work at home. So it works well for me.
Do we have any questions from the audience at this point?
How's the money compared to academia?
That was one of my questions.
If you can Google AMWA Medical Writing Salary Survey, and there's a survey that the American Medical Writers Association does, and they have it all online. It's got a lot of detail about how much more you get paid if you have a PhD, and the difference between working for a CRO, which pays less than a pharmaceutical company, small companies pay less than big companies. So I looked at that before I came, and it's averaging together regulatory medical writing, which earns more than non-regulatory, and so it's at entry level was $60,000, and average PhD salary from everybody with experience or no experience was about $100,000.
That is, yeah, that's right. I mean, you make more than you do as a postdoc. It's not hard, is it? Yeah, I mean, the entry-level positions are on the lower end, and with our company, we have different levels, RS1, RS2, RS3, et cetera, and you get a, like a measurable salary bump with each advancement, which comes, I'd say, probably around well, I'll let you know. I'm supposed to be up for 2 years in January, so I'm hoping it's around 2 years.
Similar, I think it kind of covers it.
What's the job market like for this career? Do you see it growing for medical writers? And also, what's the stability like?
I think the job market's very good right now. I think there's, at least, I don't know, Quintiles and I think PPA also, they're trying to hire a lot of people, and there aren't enough people with the experience we're looking for. So that means that more people are getting hired with straight out of academia. It was not like that 5 years ago, and I will say it's very stable. I think the CROs are more stable than the pharmaceutical companies, which are increasingly relying on CROs to do medical writing work.
We're hiring as well, although I think that right now we're currently hiring for people with experience, so that's kind of the crutch of it. But as I've heard the same thing, that pharmaceutical companies, although they usually pay more than CROs, they might hire a bunch of people and then have cutbacks, 18 months down the line, and just totally, remove their medical rag department and start outsourcing again to CROs. So it seems like CROs, because they're getting their business from multiple clients, they're more stable than pharmaceutical companies.
And at least with our company, we don't have like a steady amount of work all the time. It's like we have periods where we get a big bolus of new projects, and then those start to taper off and they kind of finish at different points. And then we have a sort of a lull towards the end of the year. People don't tend to sign a lot of contracts right at the end of the year, at least with us. So like, November, December is not the busiest. Although I've noticed that the end of the year seems to be when we hire people, I guess because we're putting out a lot of proposals and projecting more work starting, as the new year ramps up. So we sort of have that kind of cycle with our business, and I think I've seen it reflected a little bit in our hiring practices.
Questions? Yes.
Can you guys comment or speak to sort of depth versus breadth of knowledge required for, obviously it's a larger breadth than you would normally do in an academic postdoc. As Kristi, you were mentioning different projects, but in order to accurately or properly do your work, how deep into that breadth of knowledge do you need to go?
Well, when we're working on a project, we as the project lead and the research scientists are sort of expected to be the expert, because then we have, for instance, we have a strategy lead, which is either our chief scientific officer or Gary, our VP of drug development. They have 30 projects, while you'll have 4 or 5 projects. So they'll have a lot of questions along the way, or maybe you'll bring in a CMC person or a clinical person, and they'll have questions, and you're expected to be the expert on that project. So you have to do a lot of research, but you do that in terms of designing the strategy or filling in the sort of template for the meeting request, whatnot. You do the research and then you become the expert. You don't need to come into it knowing a lot about endocrinology or a lot about reproductive products. You learn that when the project starts. You do the research and then you become the sort of go-to knowledge person. Because you can't expect a strategy person who has 30 projects or a clinical person who's never been involved until the last minute when you pull them in to have the expertise. You're the one that needs to have that. But your PhD teaches you how to do that. When you, and that would be one way you could leverage the postdoc experience. You did your PhD in one area, you did your postdoc in another area. You can show you can be successful in different areas, and you can show that you can learn a new, therapeutic paradigm, stuff like that. Does that answer your question?
You have a question?
Yes. So do those companies have branches in other countries?
Yeah, Quintiles, we have medical writers in South Africa, India, Scotland and England, and Japan and China.
We're similar. We're branching out all over the world. We have similar sorts of breadth across many different nations.
We have one in Australia, but just temporarily. She had to go home.
Is there a value in speaking different languages for these companies?
For medical writing, no, I think all the documents are written in English, even if you're working for a sponsor that speaks a different language. I guess we have writers in China and Japan where there would be a value to speaking Chinese and Japanese.
Yeah, same for ours. We submit all our documents to the FDA, so everything's in English. But
Could you talk a little bit about the organizational
structure, I mean, it's different levels of medical writers. For example, I saw one ad that's medical writer 2. Minimum education is a bachelor degree. So in that sense, you know, it's not targeted at PhD level or postdoc level of applicants, or you know, look at something else. I just see what that means, minimum education.
Yeah, so you don't have to have a PhD to be a medical writer, and there are many medical writers without PhDs who do very well. I think sometimes there can be a ceiling at how high you can rise. You maybe will be hard to go into management without a PhD. So at Quintiles we have a medical writer at my level who's working on projects all the time, and then a level above are the medical writers who are mostly managing them, managing a team.
It's similar for us. You basically come in as a medical writer, and that's how we hire in people who don't have any medical writing experience, and that means like in an agency or a CRO or something like that. So basically, if you're straight out of your postdoc, you get hired as a medical writer, and then you can progress to senior medical writer and then scientific director. And with each, bump, it's you have to have a certain amount of experience in different kinds of projects. So not if you just came in and only wrote publications at our company, you're going to struggle to advance. You have to actually start taking on more strategic projects and kind of push yourself professionally, and that's how you end up moving up the ladder to the point where you're then managing projects. You're still, doing some writing, but a lot of it's going to be client interaction and strategy.
Companies will call the same position something completely different. So medical writer 2 at company X that you might have seen might be the same as principal medical writer somewhere else. So don't look too much at that title per se, but more so what it says in the description. And even then, the description might not exactly fit what they're looking for, or it might be above or below what they would hire at. For us, they recently started a new position called an associate medical writer, and that's for our entry-level positions, which we only hire kind of rarely. And then it goes up through medical writer, senior, principal, manager, associate director. But it just varies, I think, based on the company.
Yeah, and I would also to add to that, you should just go ahead and apply, and sometimes if you don't have the experience for that level, they may still consider you for a lower level position.
And we had check your shirt and then behind.
I guess I was curious also if there's any particular academic benchmarks that you look for. I know you said like length of time isn't important necessarily for postdoc, but should you be aiming to like have a paper from postdoc before you look for jobs in writing, or not as important?
I don't think it's that important. I think the whole postdoc thing is just to show that you can get a postdoc and you've had a couple of extra years of experience beyond your PhD, during which you may have written something or just engaged in a different project and gotten just a little bit of experience. But for us, we're not looking for like a certain number of papers from a certain kind of from one of your degrees or postdoc time. We just want to see evidence that you have papers. So.
Or some kind of scientific writing.
Yeah, something.
Yeah, it seems more like it's a different mentality than when you're on the academic job track. They don't really place much of an emphasis on where you published or how many things you published, just that you can do that.
And I think an experience would be probably better, or at least just as good as a few publications in your postdoc. Say like an internship or some other medical writing hands-on experience.
Gentleman in the back.
Yeah, asking out of ignorance, is there a lot of overlap or with clinical research associate work, or I always had the impression that a clinical research associate would be doing some of the similar things in terms of managing a project or something.
I think there are some small CROs where I know CRAs do medical writing. At a smaller company, you can wear a lot of different hats. At a bigger company, CRAs don't do any kind of writing.
Yeah, that's more like site visits and
Traveling.
keeping on top of what's going on at the clinical sites. I think there's much less writing. At least that was always my impression.
There's a lot of filling out databases and checking accounting totals.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the lady behind?
Are there any part-time medical things which you can do as a postdoc that would actually make your CV stronger when you actually apply for a medical writing job? Like, as a postdoc, during the evening times, you can do something related to medical writing which will make your CV stronger.
American Journal Experts is a great place to look into. They have oftentimes are hiring contract editors. There's so many others.
Just the stuff we talked about, internships and networking. Yeah, I can't say enough good things about networking, even though it is tedious. Yeah.
I mean, they know that you need to be in the lab all day as a postdoc, so they're very aware that you won't have been able to go out and work like a second job as a medical writer or something like that. So, the expectations are reasonable, but just having that little bit of extra something like an internship or something like that would be helpful.
We have time for one final question.
I had actually two. Just because you talked about a writing test during the hiring process, and what is it? I don't know what the writing.
I mean, for us, they give you pretend clinical data, and you had to write an abstract, a structured abstract, which is very typical of clinical work, more so than you're submitting in basic sciences. But they just want to make sure that you can pull out the high points from a clinical document and be able to assemble that into an abstract. And the writing is styled correctly and, no grammar issues, etc.
Okay.
Ours was a little bit more strategic, if I remember correctly. I was pregnant at the time, so my brain didn't work quite as well as it does now. But I believe ours was a paper, and we had to sort of use the paper as support to craft an argument to a client based on whether or not they should pursue a certain drug product. So there was a question at the beginning, the client wants to develop product X, it's a cream for this indication, and then I had a paper and you were supposed to just craft an argument. I don't think there's ever really a right or wrong with the writing assignments. It's more just, can you write well, can you write clearly, can you take the task that they give you and produce something, and then all the ones I took were timed.
We had a week.
Oh, wow.
They sent it through FedEx and we had to send it back to them.
We had an hour.
Yeah.
Here's something different. Was it more involved?
It was pretty involved. It was multiple parts, and there was a paper that we had to summarize, and then some clinical data. It was definitely multiple different parts. It's kind of foggy right now, but I remember the week part because it was very much like the FedEx was just going to arrive, and then you had to send it back, and it was that part was crazy.
Did you have a week or?
So Quintiles didn't give a test, but one of the people I spoke to, she likes to give tests anyway, so she gave me a table of data and said, how would you summarize this? It wasn't actually a writing test, but it was more just verbally explaining what I thought the key point of the data.
And the last tiny question that I have is that not being a native English speaker, is that something that could be detrimental?
So my manager is not a native English speaker either. I think as long as you can communicate well and write well, that's all that matters.
Yeah, I think it's mostly how well you write. If you can write clearly and concisely, it doesn't matter.
About a third of our medical writers are not native English speakers, and as long as they can write it clearly and they know science, you're good to go.
We have people. You have to just be able to